Yeah, not too much excitement in the room about that. Hang in there, not long to go, but it is really good to see you. So thank you for coming to our Westroad site this morning, a Bridge Community Church. A big hello to those watching online and those who watch on demand, particularly from our Wesley site as well. And you join us, as Andy said earlier, as part of this series, What a Star. And so far we've seen through the Nativity, a star was born. We've also seen there is a star that was promised. And this morning we're thinking about a star to follow. Something gripped people in the night sky, and that led them to seeing the superstar that is Jesus. And so I've got a question to get us going this morning. Have you seen anything in the night sky that's ever grabbed your attention? Perhaps, you saw the Northern Lights once. Not very northern here, is it? But you never know. You may have gone up north, may have gone past Watford or somewhere like that and, discovered the Northern Lights. Or maybe you saw a shooting star, or maybe some other thing. Maybe there's some clever people here, some Bear Grylls types, can guide their way through forests and places like that by the stars. Well, I must admit, I'm not one of those, but I did once have an encounter with an evening star scene that grabbed my attention. Now, I want to set the scene. First of all, we're going to go back decades here. We're going to go back to when I was at high school. And for some strange reason, one of the poshest schools in Britain that's located on the Isle of Man decided to invite my high school to come over and play cricket against them. So you can imagine the scene. The poshest kids in the world playing against a bunch of Scouse Scallies at cricket. And we had to stay there for the whole weekend, and we were so excited, as you can imagine, all Scallies on this school trip to the Isle of Man. Anyway, these may have been the poshest, richest kids going, but they were rubbish at cricket. And we discovered that after about the first hour or so, and we thought, we can batter these kids. And we got so excited because then we noticed various parents arriving in posh Rolls-Royce cars and Jaguars. And we were so excited because we almost gave up on seeing how many runs we could score, and we decided to see how many cars we could hit when we were batting. We could just see them in the car park, and everything was being hoiked round to there. And anyway, the game was quickly over. We absolutely battered them. And then we had tea, and it was lockdown time. But you can imagine the scenario, can't you? A bunch of Merseyside Scallies being locked in this posh old building from 6 o'clock onwards. It wasn't going to happen. So anyway, via a fire escape, we escaped. And we discovered the local village. And we discovered the local pub. And for some reason, they didn't seem to be that bothered that a bunch of school kids could come into their pub and partake and have a shandy or two at the time. And anyway, I'm sorry, I'm revealing a lot about my sordid past here. Anyway, we had a great time. We led sing-songs. We did all sorts of stuff. We had a fantastic time. But eventually we did get thrown out, and we started to walk back to this really posh private school. And as you're walking back over the fields, I don't know, there was just something in the night sky. It was so bright. I don't think it was the shandy. I think it was just so bright, it grabbed my attention. And I actually remember thinking, because of a little bit of a church upbringing, I thought, it's the second coming. Jesus is coming back. It was so bright, this star. I thought, Jesus is coming back. And it absolutely grabbed my attention. I'm a 16-year-old kid, whole of life to look forward to, and yet I was thought, take me now. It was brilliant. Something grabbed my attention. Something changed as a result of what was seen in the night sky. And of course, this is what happened. Well, perhaps not playing a posh private school in cricket and things like that. In the Christmas story, as we think about these wise men, or the magi, as they're described in some of our translation, they saw a star in the sky. It grabbed their attention and led them to the superstar that is Jesus. And so this morning, I really want us to think about this idea of, great, God can grab our attention at this time of year, but what are we going to do about it? 2 weeks ago, and you can check on our YouTube channel, we talked about, worship God. This is what we do this time of year. This is why we sing the Christmas carols. But somehow it's got to go beyond worship. Somehow it's got to move on to actually following God and his ways. He is the greatest guiding star in our life. And so the big question is why? Why should we follow this God? 4 things we're going to identify from the story of the wise men at Christmas on why we should follow God. First of all, we're going to see we have a God who can handle things. A God who can handle stuff that goes on in our life. And secondly, because he handles things, this can bring a sense of joy and happiness to our lives. And thirdly, it leads us to the greatest person ever to walk the earth, Jesus. And fourthly, as we discover him, as we follow him, we see him putting this protective sense around us, this keeping us from harm. And so as we think about these wise men this morning, this was the process they followed. And to be honest, 2,000 years later, it hasn't changed. We've still got a God who can handle things, bring happiness, lead us to Jesus, and keep us from harm. So I'm really hoping that this Christmas time might be significant as you move from worshiping God to really following him in these coming days. We're going to turn to the Gospel of Matthew again. First book in the second part of our Bibles, and it's a very Jewish account from the first century about the life, the times, and the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth, the King of heaven who came to earth. And even though he was a king, he seems to have this great, big, wide invitation to the whole of humanity. Come to me. Yes, worship, but follow me. And of course, the astrologers who left from the east, they're the people who absolutely bought into this wide invitation. They followed the sign of the stars. They started to study. They heard what the theologians were saying in Jerusalem. And they searched to find the answer. And they discovered at the end of their long journey, over 1,000 kilometers long, they eventually found what they were looking for. So let's dive into our verses this morning. Matthew 2, verse 9. As we think about this idea that we have a God who can handle things. It says, after the interview with King Herod, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. So they'd had this meeting with King Herod. We see the star, we hear about the star, and yet somehow these wise men got diverted. Because Jesus wasn't to be found in Jerusalem. Jesus wasn't to be found in the palace. There was a king there, a despotic king called King Herod, who had bought his kingship. He wasn't a born king. He had bought it off the Romans. And they naturally went to the place where they expected to see a king. But the King of Kings wasn't to be found there. And Herod said, I want you to go and find this king because I want to worship him. And as we'll discover later, he had no intention of worshiping him at all. So let's get this context. These wise men, they'd seen a sign, yet they're off track. They're under threat. Life is confusing. They'd been on this journey and it hadn't worked out the way they'd planned. But now they're sent on their way and the star reappears for them. That sense that God was still with them, that Christmas sense that even though they were scared, they were off track and they were lost, God was still there handling things. And actually they were really close to the end of the journey. Just 10 kilometers to go, Jerusalem to Bethlehem. Be like getting on the A134 and going to Lavenham. Simple as that. The star had reappeared and they were able to complete their journey. It's just this sense of God is handling things. We as human beings are getting things wrong. We're in the wrong place at the wrong time, meeting with the wrong people. Yet God is still saying, hey, I haven't given up on you. I'm still guiding. I'm still leading. I'm still present. I'm still handling things. This is this beautiful picture as we see the star hovering over Bethlehem. And of course, when we have this sense that somebody is handling things for us, it can lead to happiness. That sense of uncertainty, that sense of anxiety, that sense of fear can dissipate because we think we've got somebody who's handling things for us. Therefore, the sense of relief, the sense of joy, the sense of peace, the sense of reassurance begins to emerge as we read verses 9 and 10. The star went ahead of the wise men and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. That sense of relief. God hasn't left us. God is still guiding us. We might be in a foreign land. We might be under threat from a foreign king, but God is here, on track, on plan. The fear dissipates. And this beautiful truth of God is with us. And that leads to a happiness and a joy. This sense of following Jesus just led to this sense of happiness. So I don't know how things are going for your Christmas time. Some of the prayers we prayed today, some of the excitement. If on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you be if absolute anxiety down at 1 through to 10 of I've got it all sorted? Where would you be this morning? Are we a 5, a 6, a 9, or a 1 or a 2? Can I encourage you? We have a God who's not going to be taken by surprise this Christmas time. He's not going to be caught off guard by what you face, about you fearful about whether you can pay the bills as you try and put on a Christmas for your family. Can you handle those relationships where you know there's going to be tension and banging of heads and things like that? Or is it just the loneliness? We have a God who can handle that. A God who left heaven to be part of that, to be part of us. So this sense of anxiety can start to be replaced with a sense of joy as we see a God who is handling things. And also we discover that God can lead us to him, to Jesus. The wise men entered the house, saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Bethlehem was only a small place. I know sometimes on our nativity things we have like a picture of a star hovering directly over, a terraced house somewhere in Bethlehem. It probably wasn't quite like that. It was probably just hovering there, as the original Greek language implies, over that area. It was more a sense of assurance. And a town of 2,000 people, it's going to be quite easy with a few discreet inquiries to find out where the newborn baby is. And sure enough, these wise men find him with his mother Mary, and they bow down and worshipped him. Their journey is complete. We read earlier in the chapter, they came to King Herod saying, "Where's the newborn king of Israel? We want to worship him." And they've made it. They've made it to that place of worship. This beautiful picture of inclusion. Lovely, godly, obedient, teenage Jewish girl. And then these pagan astrologers from over 1,000 kilometers away in Babylon, all coming together to acknowledge Jesus and worship him. And of course, they bring their gifts. This is where we kind of guess there was maybe 3 wise men, because we see 3 gifts listed in verse 11. The wise men opened their treasure chests and gave Jesus gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These were 3 gifts fit for a king. They were expensive, much sought after. Gold, of course, often the picture, symbol of royalty and palace. Frankincense, a sweet-smelling gum that was extracted from a particular tree in the Middle East, was often used as part of worship and celebration occasions. And myrrh was often used as part of an embalming process so that dead bodies didn't smell as bad. These were the gifts for someone who was superior to them. This was part of their culture. When you came to a king, when you came to someone superior to you, you brought a gift. And that's what these wise men are doing. And we think, that's great. It's lovely. But again, I want you to grasp the sense that God is handling things. God is in control. You see, all this stuff was predicted hundreds of years before it happened. We read in Psalm 72, possibly written 1,000 years before that first Christmas, we read, the eastern kings of Sheba and Seba, modern-day Yemen, will bring him gifts. All kings will bow down before him, and all nations will serve him. There's this anticipation that when Jesus arrives, when God turns up, nations are going to gather around him, bringing gifts. And if that isn't exciting enough, it actually mentions two of the gifts in Isaiah, again, written hundreds of years before this appearance. The people of Sheba will bring him gold and frankincense and will come worshiping the Lord. If you ever doubt that God can't handle things, rethink this Christmas story. It's right, predicted, prophesied, promised for hundreds of years beforehand. We have a God who is in control, a God who knows what's going on, and a God who will fulfill what is predicted and promised. And so we rejoice, we worship, and he's worth following because of this. I can't imagine these wise men had full knowledge of this. They were pagan astrologers. They had something of the early scriptures that may have shaped their thinking. They had a sign in the sky, but it was enough for them to go on a journey and discover Jesus. And maybe as you've come along to church, maybe as you've explored one or two things, now is your time to say, do you know what? I'm going to follow Jesus. I've done some worship. I've got some knowledge. I haven't got complete knowledge, but it's enough. And I'm going to offer myself. This will be my gift. We often talk about bringing treasure, talent, time. It's a great way to worship God. And of course, you are the treasure. That's the way Jesus sees you. That's the way God sees you. That's why he guides you and leads you and protects you and cares for you, because you are the treasure. And he just longs for you to come and bring the gift of yourself to him, to enjoy him this Christmas time. And our last verse for this morning. When it was time to leave, the wise men returned to their own country by another route. God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. So again, the sense of God handling things is seen in the sense of protection, keeping these men from harm. But also, as we talked earlier, we were pushing our prayer week, and we were saying about how God speaks. This beautiful picture again of the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the God of heaven, speaking to pagan astrologers, this time through a dream. I'm not quite sure of the timings on this, but Joseph also had a dream at this time, warning him about Herod. Maybe they had a discussion about it. But either way, you get this sense of God protecting what his plans were. And these wise men, despite Herod being a horrific, despotic king, they chose to obey God rather than Herod and returning him. I think as I'm getting older, this sense of God keeping us from harm just resonates more and more. I know when I was younger, one of my big stumbling blocks with this whole Christianity stuff, this whole following God stuff, was because I thought it'd be a bit boring. I thought it'd be a bit dull. I thought, well, I can't have fun. I can't enjoy myself. And yet, as the older I've got, that sense in which peace, that sense in safety, that sense in which when I'm connected with God and following God in his ways, there is just that peace. There is that sense of safety and rest. I don't know, it seems worth far more than gold or anything else we can bring. And I just want to share that with you this morning. This is what our God brings. He's got plans to prosper you, not to hurt you. He's got plans for you not to be harmed. If you follow his ways, generally speaking, it's going to go well for you. And as we discover Jesus, and as we heard from Zena earlier, things start to become exciting. Prayer starts to become exciting as the prospect of God speaking to us impacts us. Christianity and following Jesus becomes more than just, oh, well, it's a bit dull until I get to heaven. So much more to offer. So let's finish off this section What is God saying to you this morning? There is an invitation here. Look at the breadth, the spectrum of people invited. The lovely, godly, humble Mary, part of the people of God, part of the chosen nation of Israel, all the way through to these pagan, rich astrologers. No little background, yet they're all invited to be part of the God story here at Christmas. So that means we're all invited, we're all included, if we choose to move from worship to following this Jesus. So what could be some next steps for you in exploring this? Maybe you need to trust God a little bit more. Maybe the anxiety levels at work or Christmas or relationships might be spiking at the moment. Is there any way to pause, to connect, to trust, surrender, and let him handle things? Could this lead to a sense of celebration as God starts to speak, as God starts to guide? So often we think God's guidance is almost like walking a tightrope. We're kind of there balancing. Oh, I don't want to make a mistake. I'll fall out of God's guidance. It doesn't work like that. God's guidance is like a great big fat motorway. It's wide, and you can take a few steps here or there. You can't get one or two things wrong like these wise men, but God is still handling it. God is still getting you in the right place at the right time in the right way. So trust him, celebrate him, even if you get one or two things wrong. And let's come and worship. In a moment, we're going to sing another carol before we turn to communion. And so again, bring your hearts to worship this God. And let's be obedient. As we listen to him, as we hear from him, we have a God who wants to prosper us and keep us from harm. Great reasons to follow the superstar that the star pointed to. So as we say, what a star today, we don't just mean that thing in the sky. We actually mean Jesus. He's worth following because he handles things. He can bring happiness. He reveals himself. And also he can keep us from harm. So let's continue our worship. Thanks, Kate.